Well, hello everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Susan Halvin, and I'm one of the Education and Outreach Coordinators for the NNLM-NER. And I am pleased to introduce our presenter this afternoon, Dr. A. David Lewis, who is a college educator and religious studies scholar. Most recently, co-editing Muslim Superheroes, Comics, Islam, and Representation with Martin Lund. Dr. Lewis has recently expanded his work to include the field of graphic medicine, particularly the depiction and discussion of cancer in graphic novels. He brings his bachelor's degree from Brandeis University, his master's from Georgetown, and his doctorate from Boston University to work as the program coordinator for MCPHS University's Masters of Health Science program. And when not writing the new adventures of the first Muslim superhero, Kismet, Man of Fate, for publisher A Wave Blue World, Dr. Lewis is developing an extensive graphic medicine library collection at his university, thanks to a grant from the Popular Culture Society.
Hello. Thank you. It's great to be here at UMass today, and I want to thank all the organizers for having me here. Goodbye, Matthew. What you have in front of you is not a handout. What you have in front of you, here, you may have one as well. I have handed it out, but it's not actually a handout. It is actually an onion. It is actually a document showing where I arrived and where I came from in developing a graphic medicine course for the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. Yes, if you open, you'll see how it gradually devolves, which actually shows a part of the process that I went through. Before I get to that, I want to acknowledge that not all courses were created equal, that in your individual case, you may be thinking of developing a course for undergraduates, or you may be thinking of developing a course for a community, or you may be thinking of developing a course for a graduate school population. So what I'm going to try to address today, rather than just do a post-mortem on my own experience, is try to identify principles that can be applied widely, but can be personally customized. I hope that makes some sense in addressing that. So what you'll see on the top sheet here is the course I arrived at, the course that we launched this past spring at MCPHS University, and that is a special topics course. That's the header 450, HUM 450, in graphic medicine. Even this isn't complete, because what you're not seeing is that this is being further developed into a graduate course for the fall, and then starting spring next year, it's probably going to be the core course for a graduate specialization in Masters of Health Sciences. That's just between you and me. Nobody share that. Don't record that. Don't stream that. That's entirely unofficial. But to give out sample curriculum and to give out syllabi, I find kind of unhelpful, because it speaks more to the institution or the university or the community or what have you, or the library, rather than it does to the course content and to approaches to the course content. So while you do have the syllabus right on top, I'd say skip it. I'd say skip by it. We can come back to it for particulars and details for how to do different assignments, how to weight them, but I actually want to push you all the way back to page 7. Little numbers on the top. Page 7 is a facsimile of my personal notebook, and when I started thinking seriously of how I would shape a graphic medicine class. And I had a number of ideas already. I'll talk about in a moment where those come from, how you can generate those ideas. But I knew that the registrar at my school would ask for a course description, and it would ask for textbooks they have to order. I knew those had to be the upfront materials, so that I could be working on the syllabus up until the very last moment. I didn't, but work until the very last moment, but this is what needed to precede me by a few months. So I did try to bring to the forefront here what theories and what scholars would be most important to me. I then tried to think about what texts were available out there, how I would break down the different units, and from where I would get different resources. And you can see, as you turn to page 8 in your non-handout, I had to think of assignments, how they would be graded, what lectures I would do, what sort of structure, how it would break out over what period of time, and then finally how the class would resolve. And this was, I discovered, the absolute wrong way to start this course. I did all this work. It's very neatly done. This is very neat for my notebook. And this is the wrong approach. It turned out okay, I'm pleased to say, but it's not the one that I would advocate. I would advocate one that is closer to the course that came before it. We devolve further to page 11. The class that I taught before, a wider graphic medicine class, was just a specialty course on cancer and comic books. So I was building on that to a degree. And I was less concerned with what I had to formally deliver and more concerned with what mattered to me. And this was a better approach. I'm going to tell you how to make it still better in just a moment. But so prior to the graphic medicine course, we had the cancer and comic books course. I set from the beginning what sort of tone I wanted with the class. That's the very first thing I wrote down. Explorational and informational. I thought about what I wanted the class to end with the creation of a comic book and the development of a theory. So already I was getting closer to the mode that I would suggest today, what I'm calling the GROW mode. G-R-O-W. That's how you spell grow. Good for me. This GROW method can probably more easily be called backwards design. That's a hot, jargony term in pedagogy and higher ed education, backwards design, but I'm going to throw some kinks in it along the way. What I did with the cancer and comics course that I sort of neglected to do with the graphic medicine course was the first thing I wanted to identify goals. You heard me say just a minute ago, the first thing I developed was how this would show up in the course catalog and what textbooks we would use. That is really absent, or can be absent, of what your goals should be. Whereas for cancer and comic books, I had my goals more front of mind. I wanted this to be an exploration, and I wanted it to be informational. Now let me pause for a second just to ask, you're probably here today because you have some notion somewhere in the back of your mind of someday, at some point, doing a class in graphic medicine. What would your purpose be in doing a class in graphic medicine? Before we talk about what shape it would be, before we talk about what you would cover, if someone were to ask you why teach a class in graphic medicine, do you have a sense of what your answer would be? Okay, I got a nod here. Give me an approximate motivation, a raison d'etre in the French.
To basically be able to have the students tell a story that either would be a case report or tell a story that otherwise would be being told.
Okay, so I heard case report. You're looking for them to become familiar with graphic medicine so that they have the ability, they have a tool to shape a case report graphically, visually, in comics form.
Right.
So you're looking to deliver and cultivate a tool. Great, that is a great use of graphic medicine. It's not the only one, but it's an entirely legitimate one. Was anyone else brave enough to nod their head why they might possibly do a course in graphic medicine? Yes?
I can't say what I would do in the future, but in the past,
Okay.
I've used graphic medicine class as a module at a high school to try and get the kids to be innovative and imagine how science could develop the future.
Good. So you used graphic medicine, and this is at the high school level, not at a college level, but that's neither here nor there.
They were seniors.
They were seniors, that's good, so they're practically college. They think they are.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
They think they're in college.
Think of them doing.
But this was sort of to explode their boundaries with science, to expand closer to maybe my exploration idea. I was devising this for a school of health science and pharmacy, so I had science kids as well that I wanted them to be able to go wider, go broader. The caveat I should throw in there is while graphic medicine certainly does that, while it sort of bypasses some gatekeepers and opens things broader, that doesn't make it any more shallow, right? That doesn't make it any thinner. In fact, the thing I like particularly about graphic medicine that I don't like about healthcare films, whether they are fiction or nonfiction, is that they will smooth a number of rough edges over. You can't go very deep or else you'll lose either the narrative thread or you'll lose attention span. Whereas with comics, they move at the pace of the reader's eyes and imagination. That control is largely maintained, although a pace is suggested by the drawings and the layout of the frames. But okay, I like that. These are excellent goals. One other goal you could put out there, one thing that I'm playing with for future classes is a translational goal. And I don't literally mean from English to French or from Spanish to English, although there's plenty of graphic medicine occurring in Spanish language areas. I mean taking materials and translating it into another medium that may make it either more digestible, more explorable, more engaging. I think that Rachel Lindsay, who was our keynote speaker today, suggested that you could have a patient's chart, which is a mess of text and jargon and is quite impersonal, or you can have that drawn chart, and whether that's the medical practitioner drawing the chart or the patient themselves or some combination thereof, that doesn't make it any less rich. We have a translation of information from one mode into another. So we have goals and they can vary widely. There's no one goal for graphic medicine. Here's what I think backwards design formally doesn't get to, and what ordering the textbooks is supposed to get to but doesn't really. And it's the idea of once you have your goals, what are your resources? And I mean, sure, we can talk about your library is either the resource or a shared resource if you're at a school or you're in a community. We can talk about if you're at a university, a bookstore. We can talk about your fellow faculty, fellow librarians, fellow scholars. But what I really mean is how much are you going to have to force in the door to make this work? What new things are going to have to be purchased? Maybe put through committee? What things are going to have to be approved, which is a horrible process. Anywhere, ever. The idea of going for approval anywhere. The word approval is basically a bad word. It basically means work is ahead, peril is ahead, and so forth. What is immediately at your disposal? Now, if we turn to page, I guess I called it 15, I don't know. This is where I had my head on a little bit more straight. This is where, whether or not I had developed goals, I immediately put together just what is out there. What are all the titles I can think of that might apply here? What are some of the websites that I could think of that I could go to immediately? What's some of the scholarship that's out there? And at the very top, I'm reminding myself of good instructional design principles. So I had goals, but more importantly, I took stock of my ammunition, of my resources. And what's not listed here, and I was taking for granted in a way, and Matthew, I think we talked about this at the other session, is the whole digital community that was available to me. Once I had this syllabus ready, I could share it with a number of scholars and librarians and artists and clinicians all across the world, whether that was through Twitter, whether that was through a blog feed, through the Graphic Medicine podcast, and even that podcast, that feed, and affiliated sites were again my resources. So there was a nice feedback loop there. So I will say, specific to graphic medicine, you already have a number of these resources ready at your disposal. What you further have now, that I didn't when I designed this, is conferences exactly like this, where we do actually operate in the meat space and can talk to each other and look at each other eye to eye and share coffee with each other. I did not have that necessarily at the moment that I was planning this. So these resources are getting richer. One other resource that I wouldn't overlook, this goes to another one of the panels that we had this morning, are artists themselves. Now, I want to be very careful when I say this, because I know it's on Facebook. I want to be very careful when I say this. Artists cannot live on exposure. I think that, what's the saying there? You die from exposure? You die from exposure. So you will want to think about, if you are enlisting an artist's help, how it ultimately benefits them. It could be you're putting their textbook on your textbook list. So this is sales for them. It could be that you're going to give them a community to which to sell their materials that are live on their website. Or you might have an extra $100 in your budget somewhere as an honorarium. I think that too often, as scholars or librarians, and the two are not mutually exclusive, we get shy around artists because we want it free, the way we would get it from other scholars and librarians, right? Or we don't want to enter into a negotiation of commerce. We don't want to start talking about dollar figures while we're still in this intellectual space. But as our speaker earlier today, Maki, said earlier, there is no reason not to engage an artist, talk with them, ask them about a budget, early in the process rather than later. So these are two components specific to graphic medicine that we can build into this R level, to this resources level. This next part was tough because I had to come up with an O word. No. Because I knew what I meant by this word, but it doesn't exactly capture it. I had to think about ownership. Graphic medicine is at an exciting moment right now. Comic studies overall, across all disciplines, is growing in strength. We already had a dissertation out of Harvard University. We have someone getting their doctorate in comic studies right now. That itself is growing. Graphic medicine itself is growing, but is still in a negotiation space. It's exciting. People are happy to get on board, but who owns it? Now, if you're approaching this from a librarian's perspective, perhaps, is this something that your library is doing as a one-off? Is this something that you are committing your library system to doing annually, biannually? And who monitors that? Who maintains that? Who owns it? I don't, ooh, that's pretty. That's nice. At the university level, you're going to run into something similar, except it's going to be slightly more of a departmental issue. Is this coming out of an English literature department? Is this necessarily an interdisciplinary course? And if so, to whom does the registrar assign the course number? I will say that it's better to have too many allies than too few right now. Right now, 2019. I don't know if I'll always say that. There may come a day where I say, no, we have to draw a hard line and say, this time around, kinesthesiology has to do their own thing. Just to pull one out of the air, and I love that word. But if the art department wants in, invite them in. If public health wants in, invite them in. In fact, just the opposite. Contact them to invite them in. Because I think we're at a point where people are excited about graphic medicine and they're hearing about graphic medicine, but I don't think they're yet confident in graphic medicine. I think it's terrific that we're having this conference here today. I notice it's not a 2-day conference where people have to put up for a hotel overnight necessarily. It's the New England. Everyone can drive some distance away. I'm very confident in graphic medicine. It's why I've sort of yoked my, what do you yoke something to? I've yoked my wagon to it. I've yoked my plow. Is that right?
Maybe pick a different metaphor.
Okay. Hitched my star.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay. But I think ownership is something that even at this developmental level you have to think about, and it's something that backwards design does not often include. It assumes that you're operating in a content area that has buy-in, that has authority, that has a track record, that has institutional support. I am not assuming that about individual approaches to graphic medicine. I want that, but I don't want it precipitously. I don't want graphic medicine to be suddenly owned by nursing departments, which it could. I mean, M.K. Serwick, one of our grand leaders, is practically a world-recognized nurse. And so there's good reason for it to be owned there. MK, if you're watching this, we love you. But it would stymie, it would crystallize too early this larger discussion we're having for just one group, any group, to lay claim to it. So that's why I think ownership is going to be a big issue for you to think about. Who you need to include politically, budgetarily, and what's the opposite of politically? Altruistically. Who should you reach out to? Who can benefit from this? Is there an elderly population, a handicapped population, pediatric? So that's all supposed to be in my O. As you can tell, we're approaching W. W stands for work. And this is no brilliant insight on my part. But I do have to emphasize, work means two things here for me. The more obvious one is, this is the easy part, actually. This is the fun part. The imagining your course. Are you listening to me as a, wow.
I didn't mean to.
I'm streaming it here, and it showed up there. That's a terrible abuse of technology. That's like a beam me up Scotty to the lunchroom.
I was sharing it places.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, now that we've moved on. Okay, so work. I mean it in two ways. The obvious one is now we have the labor-intensive toil of figuring out how to implement these, what texts relate to it, what resources do you have, how are we going to advertise this to students, advertise it to a community, advertise it to different hospital departments. That's the more straightforward version of work. I don't only mean it that way. I mean we now have to, I almost turned W into weaponize, but I thought that might not go over so well, particularly recorded.
We're also trying to get away from the military.
Yeah, I don't want to militarize this discussion. So instead I will say, how are you going to operationalize what you have determined here? We've got goals, very abstract. Resources, a combination of the abstract and the tangible. Ownership, entirely abstract. Now we have to take it out of abstraction. That's the work. And the best way to think about this work, most immediately, if we're talking about a student population for this course of some form or another, whether it's a non-traditional student, an online student, an undergraduate student, a high school student, is literally what work are they going to deliver to get the grade? Now look, I've held off on talking about grades till here, but we do need to determine evaluative principles and evaluative tools. So if you don't like the word grade, put in evaluation, put in assessment. How are you going to know if this worked? If what you put in place functioned properly? Is it going to be A's? Is it going to be a satisfaction chart? Is it going to be a completion rate? But that's what I'm trying to capture with the W, with the win. So the GROW approach, again, is backwards design as brought to graphic medicine specifically. I suppose it could also be applied towards any flowering topic, any burgeoning topic, any topic that is new and exciting but still doesn't have that institutionality yet. And again, let me just emphasize one more time before I start getting to the last piece of my formal part, and we talk a bit more. I am not eager for institutionalization right away. I believe that there is a professional organization on the horizon. That seems like a good, cautious step forward. That feels proper and right for this moment of graphic medicine. But I'm not calling for, we need a department of graphic medicine at every school. We need a PhD in it, an MFA in it, an EDD, a DDS. DDS is dentist, right? I only know that from Little Shop of Horrors. So I am not suggesting we use this until we accelerate past it. I'm suggesting this is a good space to be in right now. It's also good professionally. Not to put too fine a point on it, but you'll be taken as something like an innovator and someone that's growing and developing things rather than just delivering the same old, same old. I want to turn to the last few pages of the non-handout. I have, because it's publicly, freely available, taken the liberty of reproducing University of Georgia's online learning office instructional design basics. But I've made one significant change to it. I've scratched out the online part. I largely teach online, currently. I obviously have no fear of the classroom. But currently my position has me teaching online master's degree program, and I'm very happy with it. The mistake I think a number of instructors make is if they aren't teaching online, they throw away anything that says online learning on it. And I actually think that online learning is a beautiful distillation of teaching properties that also pertain to the physical flesh and blood meat space classroom. So I consider myself very fortunate to have developed first cancer and comic books, then undergraduate graphic medicine, and now graduate graphic medicine as online courses because they can be so easily upscaled into a physical space. It is very easy for me to take the curriculum that I put in place, the assignments that I delivered, even the lectures that I recorded, and turn that into a physical, eye-to-eye, geographical space presentation. I think it's going to be much more difficult going the other way, and it's what the obstacle that many instructors that I work with encounter. They've got it down to a science. It's usually a science. They've got it down to a science in the classroom, but now don't know how to take it out of the classroom and pull it online. And I want to say to them, why didn't you design it as online first? Because all the core principles are there, right? Everything to be a responsible educator of any stripe is there. It actually makes you ditch some of your trappings and some of the easy, hey, let's have a rap session, everyone gather around, we'll burn a half hour of class just doing Dead Poets Society. You don't get to do that when you're planning an online class. So this is why I'm offering on this last page, once we have identified our particular goals, resources, ownership, and are ready to do the work, turning to an online instructional design, even if you're not going to do it online. Even if you're going to do it live and person to person. Additional benefit to this, I'll just say, doesn't matter if you're in a library, hospital, university. Is there a setting that I'm not naming that you feel I should hear? I just want to make sure I'm not leaving anything out. Writer's retreat, maybe, I don't know.
Community health center.
Community health center, that's good. A clinic, sure. But if you design it as online, you can do it live as you are streaming it. You can offer it either synchronously or asynchronously. You can build a webinar out of it, or you can build a live presentation out of it, and the two can meet. Matthew, during your talk today, I highlighted that you were giving a live flesh and blood presentation, and we were having a Twitter conversation in the cyberverse while it was happening about your topic. And if you had a TA or an associate or a co-teacher, they could handle the cyberspace questions, bring it into MeetSpace, retranslate it back out. But that's only going to happen successfully if perhaps you already have online principles online. I've started to stray a little bit from graphic medicine, so I'm going to bring it back here. This is particularly important for the visual aspect of graphic medicine. How do we prepare the comics, the examples, the analysis that we're going to do? Well, 72 DPI is going to work on a computer screen. It is not going to work here if I were to project it up on the board. It would go all bitmappy, digital, and be terrible. We also have, with graphic medicine, a particular challenge that is rare to comic studies. Comic studies, which I love and adored and yoked my star to, comic studies has an accessibility problem. Think about it for a second. We can make accommodations for students that have learning disabilities, need extra time on tests, need extra time with essays, need extra time on projects or presentations. We can we can circumvent, there you go, we're not going to sail around it. We can circumvent issues with deafness. Comics are a silent medium, and if there's a lecture that I'm giving orally, we can now do speech to text really well or type up the lecture notes. Comics has a problem with the blind population. And we have, I truly don't mean this as a pun, we have turned a blind eye towards how this medium and the study of this medium and the application of this medium into this particular genre or field is going to operate for them. There have been a few suggestions put out there. We can talk about that during the Q&A if I want, but right now I'll just say we are not, I want to say this a little more kindly, we still have an accessibility challenge to really any teaching of comics that is specific to the medium when it comes to the sight impaired. I bring it up here at the end because it is something that I think will be a challenge that we can step up to. That I think enough good minds and enough technology will be able to pull us through this. But to not acknowledge it is to be its own form of malpractice. So, in summary, this is not a handout, this is an onion. Do not look at the top parts on the onion, get down to the bottom parts on the onion. The bottommost part of the onion is online instructional design. Even if you are not doing it online, do not plan to do it online. And before you plan anything, think of GROW, the principles of backwards design applied towards the specific space, the special space, the exciting space that graphic medicine currently inhabits. And that ends my formal comments. I do hate it when students end their presentations with, any questions? But that is where we're going to go next. I would like to transition this if we could. We can actually probably turn this off. I'm like dodging the light a little bit, which is fun in its own way, but doesn't help you at all. Can we talk for a few minutes about specific applications that you might have in mind, challenges that you either see in your own community, school, library, or things that you're excited about trying to pull into this?
I'm just kind of curious with the accessibility.
Yes.
I know we have to make sure everything we put online is accessible. So the way of thinking around it, is kind of describing the cartoon or describing the image, and then putting in the like what the captions are, and kind of this is what should be coming out of it. But realizing that like that's really not a great way to handle it, but that at least in trying to address it.
So I said before that my background, and this when we were talking earlier, I said before that my background is in religious studies, right? What you're describing reminds me, at least, of how Muslims look at translations of the Quran. Hang on, just stay with me a second. When we translate the Arabic Quran, the Muslim holy book, into English, it's not exactly considered a translation anymore. It's an adaptation. It's moving it out of not just its native tongue, but also stripping it of pretty much all connotation, of all associations that a native Arabic speaker might have when reading it in the native Arabic. I'm not saying that makes it wrong. I'm not saying it's bad. I'll take the Quran in translation any day. But what you're suggesting hits me sort of the same way, that if we describe each panel, if we have a text summary of each panel and each image, are we doing comics anymore? As a negotiated space, as a way to include sight-impaired persons, I get it, and I would be in support of that, but it's a really imperfect solution, right? What I've found so far in the few courses on graphic medicine that I'm familiar with is that students who are blind don't sign up for it. Just no accessibility issue because no one's asking for this accommodation. that's only going to work for so long. That's not exactly fair. Just because there isn't a population asking for something yet doesn't mean we shouldn't be looking ahead to a potential solution. What you're suggesting would be the most immediate and immediately ethical thing to do. So I support that. But then you're going to hit a theoretical problem of, is this student really getting a chance to do comics? But if they're blind, how do they get a chance to do comics? It's a great knotty problem, and K-N-O-T-T-Y problem. Not a knotty problem. Yes, tactile.
Because I don't know if machines could actually raise the comic from people.
That is a possibility. Now, I've seen something where those blocks, do you know what I'm talking about? That there are actual different patterns that are meant to, if you touch, represent different things. Animal, man has a different touch. Tree has a different touch. But what you're also suggesting is embossing images in a way, which again is possible, but now we're talking expensive. That doesn't mean it's not worth it. That just means no one has put that money in for this population that may or may not exist yet. There are potential solutions, but we haven't put our minds to it yet, and we're going to have to at some point.
And have we asked the population
Mm-hmm.
what they would want?
We have not.
Yeah, because I do have to say, when you started this,
Mm-hmm.
I have a visually impaired friend who teaches disability etiquette, and I am thinking graphic novels to teach etiquette for the visually impaired is like such a great way to go.
Amazing.
But the visually impaired community can't use
I know.
it.
Now, let me just turn this one more time. I'm going a bit off topic, but just for one moment. We could use graphic medicine to educate the sighted
Right,
on the
that's-
challenges of the visually impaired.
Right, and how to interact, and
Absolutely.
because my friend does it personally, but I think it would make such a wonderful teaching tool.
We could do a comic book, just off the top of my head, that is blurry, right? Or that has no peripheral vision.
I mean, I guarantee there are examples.
Yes,
out
there are.
In
Right.
the first thing that comes to mind is Daredevil. There have to be
The
examples.
superhero Daredevil, who has no vision but has radar sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you could adapt that way of doing that into a graphic medicine.
To Marvel Comics' credit, the first issue of Daredevil, the rebooted first issue of Daredevil that came out a few years ago, written by Mark Waid, was turned into a radio play. The whole series hasn't been, just that first issue, as a token to the visually impaired community. We have to start thinking about, if we're going to be serious about graphic medicine and teaching it to all communities and addressing all medical concerns, what we're going to do there. At this moment, maybe not, but I want to leave it marked on the map. Okay, so the original question was, if there are any specifics you want to engage now about where you are, what population you hope to serve, just notions of a graphic medicine course, what would it look like for you? What obstacles would you run into? What buy-in would you have?
What format and university structure did you teach us in so far?
Okay, so the question was, what format and what university structure did I teach this graphic medicine course for?
Yeah.
This was specifically for the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences, MCPHS University. The undergraduate courses were electives, humanities electives that all undergraduates have to take in order to get their bachelor's degree, to be accredited in Massachusetts. So this was particularly appealing, I think, to either a number of science students that were looking for something artsy, something creative, even something a little nerdy, or to others, they were surprised that they were wrong. It felt like a nice blow-off class. Yeah, I can do the history of penicillin. That probably doesn't go back very far. Let me try again. I can do the history of scarlet fever for 14 weeks, or I can do this graphic medicine thing. So I did get a mix of students. It was done online, but again, online to me feels like the space that you develop first and then bring it into the classroom, so I don't feel it's limited to online in any way. But it counted as a full 3-credit grade GPA affecting class to an undergraduate population at MCPHS. Full. We capped the roster at 30. I let 2 sneak in. Same thing with the 2 times I offered comics and cancer. Full, and I had to oversign people. Its next iteration is going to be as a graduate course through the School of Healthcare Business. The reason for that is that's where my Masters of Health Science program is located. And it's going to be an approved elective for our other graduate programs. So it's going to be a similar process, but for graduate students who I think wouldn't accept a blow-off class in a way. They wouldn't mind a class that's a little less intensive and they're not pulling their hair out. But for the money they're paying and the degree they're going to get, they want a full 3 credits. Boom. I hope to take it wider, frankly. But right now it's MCPHS that has been lovely enough to give me the opportunity, so long as I have dealt with it responsibly, to offer it there. And it's a great place to be testing it, frankly. Yeah.
Is it asynchronous or synchronous?
It currently is asynchronous, meaning they can watch my lecture at any time of day. They have a week to engage with each other over discussion boards. It sometimes turns accidentally synchronous, which is to say people are online at the same time and are reacting in real time to each other. The one trick I pulled with this course is that we use the Blackboard system. This is not a commercial for Blackboard, but we use the Blackboard system. And with any LMS, with any system, content management system, CMS, you would want to make sure that the students can log into it and it's behind a firewall so that things aren't being distributed wildly. So I make sure that everything can be accessed from behind the firewall. But I do link them to my lectures that I've put on YouTube. They're unlisted on YouTube until the class is over, then I turn them public. But it does take them out of the Blackboard space onto YouTube, where they might start having on YouTube barely asynchronous conversations with each other in the comments. So, little trick there. But yes, it is designed as being asynchronous for the working professional, the overloaded graduate student, and so forth. Doesn't have to be, though. That is not inherent to its nature.
So I'm just curious, for asynchronous, do you have any tips for keeping people engaged and really following up? Because, like, I know I've done both, and I know I prefer something. But.
Yeah. I mean, this is more of a general principle that even goes outside of graphic medicine. You do set up, you make a lot of contact points. That is to say, I don't only talk to them on the discussion board. I make an announcement over email that I will be talking to them on the discussion board at this time. And following my postings, I will have a live video office hour. And then by the next day, everyone has to do at least one reply. And that reply includes an outline for their assignment for next week. So everything is touching on each other. and they're not just going to miss one thing and fall off, but rather they're going to see the benefit of how each thing builds for them. I also tried out for a little while, what's the name of it? Got a real simple name. It's a service that I'll find the name for in a little while, where students enter their mobile phone numbers. It's a third party. I never see their phone numbers. I don't want their phone numbers.
Is it Remind?
It's Remind. Thank you very much. But we can, if you opt into it, and set how you want to be contacted. Text to each other through an intermediary. And you can also set, can they text to each other through this same route, or does it go through email, and is there a limited number? So I consider the issue more to be controlling liability for the instructor, for the university, than necessarily prompting them forward, because the way I'm designing it is constantly interlocked, just constantly. And I send them dad joke things too. I mean, if I see a comic strip that day that has anything to do with graphic medicine, even if it won't be on the exam and I'll never lecture about it, it still hits their inbox, or it hits their text, or it's going to be there on the discussion board next time they log in. And just seeing that activity, I think, keeps it top of mind. Yeah.
So I primarily work, I don't have dedicated learners. I used to teach high school. I sometimes adjunct in the English department at a community college. But in my work at Bay State Health, and with actually a track from UMass Medical, I don't have dedicated learners where I could say, buy this text, we're going to have this wonderful extended class, even though that would warm my teacher heart.
Yes.
Especially for continuing and professional development folks, it would look more like a half-day session exploring graphic medicine. So I'm intrigued by these, posters where it gives, meaningful excerpts where we can do what Rachel did this morning of, here's a section, let's do a close reading of the imagery and the text. But I'm curious, how have you found the ability to make these types of things happen where you have to work with excerpts? What, really sort of logistically, how do you make that work?
Okay, so let me break that question into two parts, if you don't mind. I'm going to go to the second part first, I think, which is there is a wealth of webcomics and digital comics, high quality, that are being produced right now.
Yeah.
And if you don't have people who can just go out and buy things and all be on the same textbook together and have assigned reading, you can get it up on the screen while you're there. You don't even need an internet connection. You could preload it to your computer and just stick it through a projector. So that's the first workaround I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
There's the Annals of Graphic Medicine is a key one. The Nib does healthcare stuff all the time. Hyperbole and a Half, which is now a print book, was a webcomic. So was Mom's Cancer.
Which I think is still available on Go Comics.
Mom's Cancer may still be available. I'm sorry, everyone who just got a shot of my belt. Okay, but to your second point. Yeah, there we go. To your second point, doing things like this. These posters actually come from a conference that Matthew and I did this past weekend at Harvard. But yes, you could prepare exactly this. And artists, by and large, this costs them nothing. Right? To send you the high-res files they already have, which you don't need to put into poster board. You could just project on a screen, or you can pay just a few bucks to put it on foam core board, maybe. But yes, this gives you the opportunity to do close readings, really look at the texture of the art, look at the use of black and white and layout, much like Rachel Lindsay did at our talk earlier. The only thing you lose here is context.
Right.
The only thing you lose, and I think we tried to capture it here, Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is at least here we have a 2-page spread, which is not insurmountable, right? It's just something you need to address, and it's something you can build in. you can actually put to the readers in the classroom. This was preceded by an incredibly funny sequence. Does that change your reading? Or the imagery of flowers has appeared all throughout that book. Does it make the flower on this page stand out in some new way to you? So you can have the isolated reading and then fool them in a way into a context-laden reading. There's nothing wrong with doing that. So long as you maintain the responsibility for it, it can actually be incredibly useful. So I love the idea of a half or full day seminar. I love the idea of individual modules, right? Come back when next time we will talk about this other topic. And people can come into that naively because they're just interested in that topic, or they can build off a previous conversation. I mean, what's the thing? It's a feature, not a bug. I see that as having opportunities to it rather than I only have them for a certain amount of time and I can't force them to read anything. Okay, that's good to know. Now we know how to limit your resources. And we also know who's going to have ownership here. It actually kind of shapes, now we have a lowercase r for resources instead of a capital R. I don't see that as bad.
And so you said you reach out to the artists?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
That's great to know.
So I'm gonna separate that just slightly. Reaching out to independent artists is easy. They make themselves so available on social media, and they're frequently part of the graphic medicine conversations we're already having in various corners of social media. Gets slightly more trickier when you want to invoke a very mainstream author. If I want to talk about, we already hit Daredevil. Let me go with Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange has a movie out. Doctor Strange is hip. Doctor Strange had to deal with medical ethics. He actually has a storyline that you can buy in trade paperback form that Amazon has plenty of, and it's cheap, called Doctor Strange: The Oath, where he has to decide whether or not to cure cancer for the planet. Cool topic. Awesome. And this is why, and Matt, you mentioned at your previous talk, this is why I do turn into the skid and address superheroes when it comes to graphic medicine. They are fantastic, so they don't fall into the same space as graphic memoir, right? Real life, life and death issues. But I still see them as very useful, particularly when it comes to bioethics, medical ethics, big picture ideas. The problem you'll run into is that this is written and drawn by some very well-known star-level creators, and they're doing it for a major, now Disney-backed publishing company. So then you have to consider the issue of fair use. At that point, you have to consider, am I costing Disney anything by putting this excerpt up on the board? Could I actually reach the writer who also wrote for Lost, who also wrote, less likely. But if we're talking about graphic memoirists, if we're talking about webcomics creators, if we're talking about people like Rachel Lindsay, who are involved in the graphic medicine community, then yeah, if you're not costing them money and may even be bringing them some money, they may do it out of the kindness of their heart, they may do it out of their art, out of their message, but also bringing them money is good, because that's probably why you're doing it too. To stay employed and a passion. They go together.
Can I do my library thing?
And now, Matthew No with his library thing.
I just want to warn, so if you reach out to an artist, like you mentioned projecting instead of doing the print thing.
Yes.
Just make sure that the file stays local. If an artist sends that to you, don't upload it into Blackboard.
Right.
Don't upload it into Canvas, because then it could very easily just disappear into the internet, and then you've lost all control over it. And your students may also be like, cool, download, do stuff with. Like, maintain local control if an artist shares something like that with you.
Low resolution,
Yeah.
Might be, or check with the artist. They may be okay with it being repurposed for other things. They may have a Creative Commons attribution to it, and they may actually tag on it. Yeah, you can remix and repurpose this for non-commercial design. I have had artists who have liked that their work was messed with for a student's final project. They're not offended, they're honored. But you need to check.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Oh my gosh, we're almost done. No wonder I'm sweating.
This room always
This room's
gets
always-
warm.
Oh, it's because it's hot.
Yeah.
Okay.
We could open the door, well, I don't know.
I was trying to keep the sound,
One more thing I might throw out there is you don't have to take on graphic medicine in its entirety. I was scared to do it all at once. That's why I started with just focus on cancer. You can focus on just a specialty and contribute to the overall knowledge. So you can say, I'm teaching this course in the representation of mental health in comics. That's huge already. You could limit that to depression in comics, or even to postpartum depression in comics, and say this is a slice of graphic medicine, and it would still be valuable, important, an entry point. There's only so much space to title these things, but you don't have to make it a graphic medicine course, because there are even parts that I have to responsibly leave out. I only do so much with disability studies, right? I only do so much with case studies. Does graphic medicine reduce metrically reported anxiety in children before surgical procedures? I note that that exists out there, but I don't teach it. So you don't have to take a full bite out of it. It might even be more strengthening and better for the community if you occupy a particular point. Yeah.
I'm just curious, have you ever used like maybe sections or like little parts of your graphic medicine like in your other classes? Like maybe as like, if you have a whole semester long class, maybe you do 1 week where you show like something about graphic medicine and then, but like kind of incorporate it.
Well, yes, I have. But the tense that you put it in, I can't say yes to. So in my English literature classes, and in my religious study classes, and in other classes, I have had weeks on graphic medicine. But I had not developed a graphic medicine course yet to break a piece off of and then import into someone else's class. So what you're suggesting, I like. No, I'm just saying I like it, and it's something that you could offer to peers. You could say, you're doing the history of Black representation in the United States, and I have a book here that I talk about on them experimenting on Black airmen. Why don't you bring that into your course? So there is definite opportunity, utility to that. The modular aspect to that is quite attractive, but it's what I did, me personally, what I did first, rather than am doing currently. I like that in terms of the ownership issue. I like that in terms of you develop a full course, and then the art history department says, hey, we've been left out. And you say, oh, you know what? This week we cover something. I'm out of examples. But I could bring that into any art history class. And then you have a nice reciprocity, a nice synergy. I feel done.
No,
Does
you're-
everyone feel done?
Giving us a lot of information, and my wheels are turning.
Do you want to do an NLM curriculum plug since you're standing up there? And
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. So for my own class, when I got to the work part and I thought about what do I want them to deliver that does my goals, and what do I want to get here, and how do I want to build it weekly, I saw a spot where I wanted to start kind of training them for how to visualize things, for how to do comics, and the best way to do that was to take exercises from NLM's dedicated graphic medicine curriculum. I took it, I modified it, and I gave it to them.
Woohoo, NLM.
NLM, all the way. I didn't take all of them. I mean, let me just be clear here. I said, this one will work, that one won't. This one will work, nope, nope. And this one if I cut off the second half. So these aren't sacred, right? And in fact, I think they are out there as jumping off points, not just carbon copy these, get them out. Anyone remember mimeograph machines? Mm-hmm. Okay. That isn't just when I said copy them, that's what triggered in my head. Yes, there are fantastic resources like that where you don't have to reinvent the wheel, you can decide what kind of hot rod you're attaching the wheel to. NLM. Thank you for the reminder.
David, thank you very much.
Bye! I'll come with you to the next session. Thank you.
Yes, and I'm supposed to remind people